I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. And so we observe the world, we see what happened, and then we define the thing that happened as the reason the thing happened. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. Maybe even ask them about that thing that they've created, because to them, it's immensely valuable. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We have no other choice. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
Never know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondilloo and Cass Midgley.
Welcome everyone to episode 142 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today Dr. Bob and I interview Matthew O'Neill. Matthew is an activist, theologian, and teacher. He has an MA in theology from St. Michael's College, and like myself, he's a certified humanist, chaplain, and celebrant. He's the author of What the Bible Really Does and Doesn't Say About Sex, and he writes for the Danthropology blog through the Patheos network. He lives in Vermont. Today we talk about O'Neill's Catholic upbringing and his latest book, Afterlife, Solving Science and Religion's Greatest Disagreement, which he wrote after having a near-death experience. Of this book, Dr. Michael Shermer writes, quote, "What happens after life?" Matthew O'Neill answers this question with learning, elegance, and grace. He reveals the surprisingly rich history of heaven and hell and many other religious ideas that believers assume have always existed in their present form, but in fact evolved along with society and culture. There may be no scientific evidence for an afterlife, but O'Neill demonstrates how this fact leads to a most uplifting conclusion. To discover it and how to live a fulfilling life without an afterlife, read this beautiful book." Unquote. We're delighted to bring you this conversation with Matthew O'Neill, which will begin in a few minutes. Before we get into that conversation, as you know, this podcast chronicles the stories of people recovering from Christianity and getting healthy, myself included. Something that comes up a lot is the notion of agency and discovering oneself and acting from that authentic self. There are lots of factors that contribute to arrested development in people, and Christianity is just one of them. Christianity not only tries to minimize oneself to be eclipsed by Jesus or the Holy Spirit, but it can bring out the worst in people. One way it does this is it removes responsibility from its followers. In Christianity, our mistakes are cast into the sea of forgetfulness, or they're cast onto the sacrificial scapegoat of Jesus and are now covered in the blood. Sometimes Christianity demotivates personal development because it is worthless to be good, as in Isaiah 64:6, our good works are filthy rags, or even impossible to be good, and thus a futile effort, as taught by Paul in Romans 7. Quote, "I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. If I do what I don't want to do, it's no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my flesh. For I have the desire to do good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do. Instead, I keep doing the evil that I don't want to do." Unquote. Contrast these lines of thinking and futility and weakness and impotence with the wisdom that is coming out of science and the study of what it means to be human. The following declarations of healthy adulthood by Dr. David Rico may reveal some unhealthy mindsets left over from your Christianity. I recommend his book, How to Be an Adult, a handbook on psychological and spiritual integration. A link is in the show notes. These are some rich statements loaded with meaning, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to read them without comment. There are 32, And here they come. Number 1, I accept full responsibility for the shape my life has taken. Number 2, I need never fear my own truth, powers, fantasies, wishes, thoughts, sexuality, dreams, or ghosts. Number 3, I trust that darkness and upheaval always precede an expansion of consciousness. Number 4, I let people go away or stay, and I'm still okay. Number 5, I accept that I may never feel I am receiving or have received all the attention I seek. Number 6, I acknowledge that reality is not obligated to me. It remains unaffected by my wishes or rights. Number 7, one by one, I drop every expectation of people and things. Number 8, I reconcile myself to the limits on others' giving to me and on my giving to them. Number 9, until I see another's behavior with compassion, I have not understood it. Number 10, I let go of blame, regret, vengeance, and the infantile desire to punish those who hurt or reject me. Number 11, when change and growth scare me, I still choose them. I may act with fear, but never because of it. Number 12, I am still safe when I cease following the rules my parents or others set for me. Number 13, I cherish my own integrity and do not use it as a yardstick for anyone else's behavior. Number 14, I am free to have and entertain any thought. I do not have the right to do whatever I want. I respect the limits of freedom and still act freely. Number 15, I overcome the urge to retreat on the brink of discovery. Number 16, no one can or needs to bail me out. I am not entitled to be taken care of by anyone or anything. Number 17, I give without demanding appreciation, though I may always ask for it. Number 18, I reject whining and complaining as useless distractions from direct action on or withdrawal from unacceptable situations. Number 19, I let go of control without losing control. Number 20, choices and perceptions in my life are flexible, not rigid or absolute. Number 21, if people knew me as I really am, they would love me for being human like them. Number 22, I drop poses and let my every word and deed reveal what I am really like. Number 23, changes and transitions are more graceful as I cooperate with them. Number 24, every human power is accessible to me. Number 25, I live by personal standards and at the same time, in self-forgiveness, I make allowances for my occasional lapses. Number 26, I grant myself a margin of error in my work and relationships. I release myself from the pain of having to be right or competent all the time. Number 27, I accept that it is normal to feel that I do not always measure up. Number 28, I am ultimately adequate to any challenge that comes to me. Number 29, my self-acceptance is not complacency, since in itself it represents an enormous change. Number 30, I am happy to do what I love and love what is. Number 31, wholehearted engagement with my circumstances releases my irrepressible liveliness. And number 32, I love unconditionally and set sane conditions on my self-giving. I love this picture of adulthood, aspire to it, and commit myself to do the work needed to attain this level of health and maturity. It's never too late to grow up. Don't forget, ReasonCon in Hickory, North Carolina is coming up the weekend of April 21st. More information is available at reasonnc.com. I'll be there with lots of listeners and former guests of this podcast. If you're planning on going, I'd love to meet you, so let's meet up at ReasonCon. We taped this conversation on February 5th, 2017. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can support us monetarily in two easy ways. You can pledge $1 per episode or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast. Or you can leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode was created by our guest today, Matthew O'Neill. His music can be found at soundcloud.com/I'm Matt O'Neill. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. Well, what we like to do is, the premise of our show is that we interview people about their religious journey, usually out of religion or some kind of deconstruction of their faith or loss of faith.
Right.
So if we don't mind, before we get into the book, do you have a religious background?
I do, absolutely. If you couldn't guess by the last name O'Neill, I grew up in a Irish Roman Catholic household. Mm-hmm. Very, very Catholic. I'm one of 10 kids, if that's any indication.
My.
Yeah.
Okay.
I am dead smack in the middle. I'm number 5 of the 10. So we were a pretty devout family growing up. We went to church every Sunday, and of course during religious holidays we'd go to masses as well. Mm-hmm. So my faith sort of fluctuated growing up. I went through phases of being super devout and really committed to the faith, and then I would go through phases where I'm like, I'm not really sure I can connect with that or believe that. So I went to a Catholic college. That's where I received both my bachelor's and my master's degrees. Mm-hmm. During that time, I became, really much more lapsed in the faith and really very lenient on what was acceptable and what wasn't, mostly because, I went through different life experiences. I made friends with people who were, who identified in the LGBTQ community and was like, well, these are good people. So I don't think that whole thing about gay people going to hell or not being allowed to marry is justified. So, sure. Left and right just started tossing things out. But sort of one of the more critical moments for me was my senior year, being in a religiously affiliated school. We had to take religion courses. Mm-hmm. And I took a New Testament course with a Catholic priest. And when we got to the book of Revelation, he started talking about it and was fumbling over his words. And then he just stopped and he said, okay, I've just got to take a moment right now to tell you all that this book, it's a bunch of malarkey. It's bullshit.
The book of Revelation or the whole Bible?
Specifically the book of Revelation, but that was still pretty eye-opening for me, even having a priest admit that this book of the Bible, it's all just nonsense and it's so hard to decipher. And it's really, putting it in the historical context, he said, it makes sense understanding certain things, but to take it as literal fact, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
For me, it was just like, well, it's just this one book, and I wonder about the rest. And so it was really my own exploration after that. And
now, where is St. Michael's? What state?
It's in Vermont.
Okay. Is that where you're calling from?
Yeah.
Okay. The great state of Vermont. Are you a Sanders fan?
Oh, absolutely.
Isn't he great?
He is. Full disclosure, my fandom, there was a tattoo shop that was giving out free Bernie Sanders tattoos, and I definitely got one.
No way.
Yeah.
Outstanding.
Do you have a lot of tattoos, or?
I do, actually. Both my arms are sleeved out. So.
Oh, my gosh. I didn't notice that in any of the photos I saw of you. You look kind of young. Yeah. How old are you?
I'm 33.
Okay. Well, to have written a book, and you got your master's in theological studies, or, master's in theology from St. Michael's. And so you're in college. There's holes starting to form. Where do you identify now on the, like atheist, agnostic, humanist, whatever?
I definitely fully accept the title of atheist. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm becoming more and more of a harder atheist than I was before because before writing this book, there was actually a lot of subject matter that I was really kind of agnostic on, but was like, there's some stuff I think we just won't know. But then getting into like quantum mechanics and all that, it was like, oh, wow, so we can know definitively like these things really don't exist, or there's like little to no chance of them existing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, fully grasp the title of atheist.
So how does your family, are you out to everybody, and how do they feel about it?
Yeah, my whole family knows that I am. I think like my siblings are okay with it, like it doesn't bother them at all. And I think, I don't know for certain because they haven't talked to me about it, but I think, they're all pretty intelligent people, and they talk with me about a lot of the flaws that they see in the faith and in religion and all that. So I think they're more along the agnostic atheist lines as well. But my parents are the ones that really struggle with it. I mean, even recently I was going through sort of a personal crisis, and I had reached out to them for some support. And my mother's first response was, "You need to start going back to church." And I just said, "No, I'm not doing that."
Yeah.
But so they're the ones, I mean, they're respectful about it. They don't push it on me like I need to accept Jesus into my heart or anything like that. They actually will talk to me about different theological issues. Like my mother, for instance, didn't know that Judas had committed suicide and started asking me questions about that. And so we had this whole discussion around it. And it was very polite and very, it was just a well done conversation. Yeah.
Well, isn't that odd? I mean, you would think that of all things, Mom would know. I mean, it's part of the story of
Yeah, even Bob knows that.
Even I knew that, which is kind of bizarre. But, the notion that he did this, he knew it was wrong, the 30 pieces of silver, and he killed himself. Now, there's various ways, that we think, he hung himself, but there's also the bowels thing where he cut his belly open or something, or tripped and fell or something.
It's vague, yeah.
Yeah. But isn't that something interesting? So where were we?
Well, he's out and proud, and his parents are a little disappointed. And I know when tragedy strikes your life, a lot of theists will say, "Well, this is God, trying to get your attention," or she might just be saying, "You'd be more stabilized emotionally if you could rely on prayer, and if you were relying on God, and then you'd have more peace of mind," or whatever. I don't know what she
was. That where she was going with it? Do you think?
I think that's part of it, but I also think too that there are studies done by like Duke University that say, people who go to religious services, they tend to be happier, not because of the worship, but because there's this sense of community and the sense of stability and regular routine, and the fact that the community supports people who are in crisis. So, there's these social things that support people through religious services and religious communities, but it's not necessarily the religion itself that helps people.
Right. And I would think there's some psychological thing too, where you let go, let God. Well, I've dealt with that. I'm just putting it in God's hands. Yeah. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's that. Even though it's a delusion, but still, it makes you feel better.
Well, that's that's the purpose of social constructs. Almost is to to give order to chaos, and we're not very good at chaos as humans.
No, we don't like it. Yeah. How
just
true.
Feeling alone in the universe. That's a pretty dark feeling. In fact, your book alludes to something that has been a fascination of mine for years. I did an episode on Ernest Becker's book, Denial of Death, and that was episode 52. It's in your chapter 5, I think, that you reference Corey Cook at the University of Washington, and he did a study about the terror of death. Yeah, and it's very similar. I mean, it's basically the same thing. I imagine Corey Cook's familiar with Ernest Becker, but he's deceased, and the book was written in the 70s, but there's a group of social psychologists that took it up, and mostly because when he wrote it, it was just almost a hypothesis, and there was no evidence. He had done no testing, and so these 4 social psychologists did the studies to actually either prove or disprove Becker's theories, and it's called the worm at the core.
The worm at the core.
Yeah, okay. Referring to the apple, I guess. I mean, of Adam and Eve, almost. Anyway, so the denial of death is a big deal, and I'm fascinated with it, and you address it a lot in the book, and I think we could probably move into the book now.
Sure. We got to tell the story, of course, the story of how the book generated.
Yeah. Well, you had an enlarged heart from birth. Is that correct?
Yes. So I was. They believe at least that I was born with this condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and what that means is I have excess muscle tissue around my heart. It was a condition where at the time they were like, okay, we know there's going to be complications when you grow up. We just don't know what it is. And when I was 14 years old, actually, yesterday was the 19th anniversary of when this happened.
Wow.
So I thought it was really cool that we had scheduled the interview yesterday.
Right. We were supposed to tape yesterday, and we had technical difficulties. But, 19 years ago. And you've had procedures. What have you had done?
Well, All I've really had done was I had an internal pacemaker defibrillator implanted. They haven't done any like open heart surgery on me or anything like that. Because what happened was when I was 14, again, walking into school, my heart went into fibrillation. Like it just started beating really fast, roughly about 320 or so beats per minute.
My tachycardia. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and then it just stopped. And so I have very faint recollection of the event, but I just remember walking into the school right outside the nurse's office, and then everything went white and black. And then I opened my eyes and I was in the hospital about 4 hours later. But so, yeah, I was clinically dead for a short time. They started CPR right away, which prevented, we assume, any sort of brain damage. But the next day implanted the pacemaker defibrillator, and it has, saved me a couple of times. So if my heart ever goes out of whack, it shocks me and gets it back into a regular rhythm. Didn't
I read that your dad was there helping with the CPR?
Well, he worked at the school?
Worked at the school. He was a teacher. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did anybody start asking you, did you see the white light? See any relatives saying, come on over? Or
my older brother came to visit me the same day, and he had started asking me. Of course, at the time, he and I were big into the X-Files, so he started asking me all these questions about, like coming from the TV show and getting me to laugh and stuff. But he had sort of said, like, hey, did you see a tunnel with a white light? Did you see Pops, our grandfather, and did you see any dead relatives or anything? But even at that point, I was like, no, I didn't see anyone.
Huh. But what you recall anyway is this black light or flash like in a darkness, and that's pretty much it, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it was very literally, with the exception of the flash of white and then black, it was like going to sleep and having a dreamless sleep.
Mm-hmm. Oh, how about that? And why do you suppose other people say, well, I floated above myself and I saw this and that and I saw the doctors and I heard this and, I mean, it's just, and it's not just people saying it, it's people writing about it, 23 minutes in heaven or some bullshit like that. Anyway, those kind of things are, what's up with that? Or is it just that we're very creative? we just come up with stuff.
Well, creativity is definitely part of it. And I mean, it's true with any memory that we have. I mean, there have been various studies. Actually, Bart Ehrman talks about this in his latest book, Jesus Before the Gospels, where he talks about the problem with relying on memory to tell stories and everything, where we start to sort of warp truths and we get memories mixed up with other memories and we start inserting things that weren't there or we embellish them, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. But well, and since those tropes, Matthew, are in the culture right now, I mean, I know about it, the white light and all that stuff and grandpa and stuff. It's in the movies. You see it when they, demonstrate it in the movies. So maybe that's what happens. People kind of grab and take, like when you get beamed up by aliens, they're probing me. I mean, maybe that's it, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of it, is it's so ingrained in our society. But if you go out to different cultures, I mean, they have similar stories, but it's completely different. So instead of seeing a white light and then seeing Jesus and God, if you're out in the eastern part of the world, they'll see a bright light and then there's Vishnu. And, you go to the Middle East and there's the 72 virgins waiting to greet you when you show up. So it's very similar stories in terms of like the specific motifs that carry over from culture to culture, but there's different things like different gods or different things that they see based on the culture that they're in.
Hasn't science also said, well, with the deprivation of oxygen and those kind of things, there are some hormones that are secreted, and you do have some strange
brain function.
Yeah, you say you do remember. Well, you remember a flash anyway. What? There was no flash, but that's what you remember. So clearly, something's going on with the synapses or serotonin or something up there. So
yeah. I mean, it's sort of a combination of all those things. Where I mean, some people argue that it's DMT that enters the brain. I mean, like that's something that, happens when we're dreaming and stuff. So that has an element to play in it. You're right that it's the lack of oxygen and, that we get those visions and things because our brain starts, hallucinating because of the lack of oxygen. Part of it, too, is because of various things going on. We get tunnel vision because the brain, or not necessarily the brain, but different parts of the body start really needing the blood more. And so it drains from the back of our eyes and we lose blood pressure and we get tunnel vision, and that's when we receive the light. So there's very much a huge body of scientific study that's gone into these various parts, and it all can be recreated in different scenarios. So, the right chemicals, if you take, I wouldn't suggest it, but if you take the horse tranquilizer ketamine, that recreates a lot of the same effects. Mm-hmm. If you're in a flight simulator and you go through G-force, not wearing goggles, you'll get the tunnel vision and you'll get the floating out of the body, and people have done experiments with electrodes in different parts of the brain, and when they're turned on, people see themselves floating out of their bodies and stuff. So, these are all just various functions of the brain and the brain going through a traumatic experience and firing off certain synapses, like you said, or firing out different chemicals and the brain responding to those. So again, it's all recreated in different scientific studies.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and that's not a hard sell for me, because obviously everybody dreams, and our brains are the most creative things. Like, you know the oddities of just being in a dream, and you're walking in a mall, and then a baby Godzilla comes out of Bath and Body Works.
What the hell kind of dreams are you having?
No,
but I know what you mean.
The same that everybody's having. Fucked up.
Yeah.
Weird. That's the point. Is that all of this stuff is so easily understood for me that the brain's just going to do what it does. And it's going to borrow from, like you said, cultural memes and tropes.
Yeah, sure.
And put that in there, and there's grandma, and there's the 72 virgins, or whatever your culture is. It's going to include, those in this little scenario that it creates.
Sure.
And so the fact that it's still firing and coming up with narratives in your head, that's easy for me. I all of this is easy for me to understand. That whenever somebody says I saw this or I saw that, I just roll my eyes at them, because it's like your brain gave you a little narrative, and I think it's worth noting, very much so. And this is a big deal, because that's memory. I was reading that section of your book, and I've seen this before, but it is worth repeating for the listeners and for the world, is we've got to get it in our heads. In both good and bad ways, our memories haunt us, and they shame us, or they create a narrative that becomes a core belief that my dad didn't love me, or he never supported me. And it's largely based on memories, which are highly fallible. I was just thinking the other day, I was listening to a podcast, and it was the guy who directed and wrote the new movie La La Land, and he also did Whiplash. Right. Because he was a drummer growing up, and I was a drummer growing up, and it reminded me, because he mentioned Buddy Rich, who's a famous drummer. Yeah. And I'd had all these narratives in my head that my dad died when I was 17, Matthew, and I was the only son, and we were 41 years apart, and he was one of those busy guys that didn't engage with me that much. And so I kind of had this father hole, or this affirmation hole, that I just felt like I spent the rest of my life trying to get everybody's attention because I didn't get enough from my dad or whatever. But the cool thing about psychotherapy is that you can kind of recreate the story, because your memory has already done that, and all you do is just twist it a little bit. And that was, he didn't like me, he didn't affirm me, and he didn't support me, and that's the narrative. Well, I'm driving home the other day, and I remembered that we lived in a little town, and he drove me 2 hours to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to see a live Buddy Rich concert, and got me a backstage pass to get a signature.
Wow.
And so I'm just saying that, that sounds like he really hated you. Exactly. But I had filtered that out, because the narrative that I had bought into was that he didn't like me.
Didn't fit. Exactly.
And and so I'm just going to read a section here from
Matthew's book.
Yeah. Okay. This is page 131 for those following along at home. The problem is that our memory is incredibly faulty. Dr. Daniel Schachter, a Harvard University psychology professor that specializes in human memory and amnesia, says problems arise in memory from different points. People tend to place their own reactions or feelings into a memory, which tends to alter how they perceive it. And when a person recalls a memory, it is like pulling out a document in a storm with debris flying around. It's not simply the act of pulling out the document and placing it back in the folder once the memory has served its purpose. it can be influenced by outside factors like emotions when the memory is recalled and then placed back where it was found.
Right.
Quote, when you recall a memory, Schachter says, it is not simply read out. You have to store and consolidate or stabilize it again. And when you do so, unquote, and when you do so, it's
changed.
It's changed. And
Yes.
and that's every time that you access it.
Wow.
So you go to that file, you pull it out, you bring it up, you chew on it, you read it, you're kind of imagining yourself in that, then you put it back, and the next time it's not in the same order. I mean, I'm just saying, I think it's really, really helpful for people in their personal journey to acknowledge that you might need another story. It's not hard to give yourself one because you've already given yourself the one you're using. You think it's concrete, you think it's real, and it's not. And so give yourself some permission to create another story that's going to make you a happier, healthier person. And that's not lying to yourself because it is, but you already are.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. You got any thoughts on that, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I think people, especially within the U.S. culture, I mean, I'm not going to get too much into it, but you think about the political landscape right now, everyone is so much more involved in how things make them feel and their memories, and they're not concerned with objective facts.
Yeah.
And so when people are digging into those memories and saying, I remember this, or this made me feel that way, that's doing exactly what you were just talking about. I mean, they're taking out those memories that are faulty already, using that as fact, and then incorporating it with the emotions that either they're feeling right there or with an emotion that they affiliated with the memory, which may be altered already to begin with. And, that's really what's leading our whole discussion along those lines too. And it's really important, I think, for people, especially during this time, to think objectively, how are my emotions affecting the way I'm interpreting this, how I'm interpreting a memory, and what really is truthful and what is just my emotional response to the situation.
Right, very true. But what's happening now, and we're seeing it over and over again, is the gaslighting when an official says, no, I didn't. It didn't happen. That didn't happen. And then we've got videotape that shows it happened, and we watch it over and over again, and he says, no, that's not right. That's not it. That I think drives people kind of nutty.
Yeah.
So, and I think you make a good point, Matthew, because what I was saying was in a case where it's very personal, it's intimate, it's only me and my dad, and he's not alive to change the story.
Right.
And it's going to make me a happier person if I do. I basically access the Buddy Rich concert more than, that he didn't, give me what I wanted or whatever, and which story I'm going to believe. That is kind of what I'm talking about as far as giving yourself license. What you're pointing out is that there's a pitfall here. That if it's a society or if culture, just like recently this movie about the NASA African American women,
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures.
Yeah.
It's like, why hasn't that story been told before? I mean, that we have done selective history and reporting, and these create narratives in our heads, which the constructs by which we now see the world through. And it turns out there's big holes, or there's there's stuff lacking. And so I'm in agreement with you that we can't just give ourselves license across the board to spin it the way we think it went or whatever. So I just want to differentiate those two things. The permission I was giving myself versus this, this cultural thing. No, we need to stick to the facts. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So where were we? We can go back.
We're in the book here. So
okay.
he's.
Well, first he had his heart episode, right? And now, and you're 14, 15 years old when that happened?
Yeah.
So did that start you on your journey then? After your brother said, "So did you see Gramps?" And you said, "No." But gee, what happened? Was that the beginning, or?
Yeah, I mean, that was really the beginning for me, in a number of different ways, for a completely new stage in my life. I mean, first, really understanding like, oh wow, holy shit, I could die really at any time now. But the other part of it too was, how come I didn't see, the light at the end of the tunnel? How come I didn't see angels and hear heavenly voices? How come I didn't see fire and brimstone, So it was just this huge question for me. But I was giving myself excuses too. Like, if I go and get, hypnotized, maybe I can start bringing back these repressed memories that I have of the afterlife. But I never went down that path, and instead, it remained a curiosity to me, and I sort of here and there would pick up like different articles to read or books to check out about the afterlife, and was interested in it. But when I went for my master's degree and it came time for me to write my thesis, I was really very interested and involved in finding out what Scripture said about the afterlife. And I wrote my thesis and turned it into my professor. But the conclusion I ultimately came to, which is sort of the same one I make in the book about what Scripture says, is it's not what mainstream society acknowledges as the afterlife. In fact, what we know it to be is completely extra biblical, like it's stuff that came from outside of the Bible.
Yeah, this is a fascinating point, because
great.
I was telling Bob yesterday, we were reading up on your bio and stuff, and basically this eternal blissful paradise is not in the Bible.
No.
Really?
Not at all.
I mean, I've read the Bible, and I think maybe what comes to mind right off the bat is when Jesus is hanging on the cross and the thieves on either side, and one of them, is kind of repentive. Yeah. And he says, well, today you'll be with me in paradise. And I'm sure that's obviously, since the New Testament was written in Greek or whatever, that was the Greek word for paradise, but maybe that's where we get it.
So there's a couple of interesting points about that. So the first thing to remember is that specifically comes from the book of Luke, which of the four Gospels is like the second latest, with the exception of the Gospel of John. The other thing to know is that there were no eyewitnesses there to have written about it, even though the Bible says that there was. During that time, if there were people hanging around a cross while a criminal was being crucified, those bystanders would have been crucified as well, because they would have been viewed as showing allegiance to these people who were being executed. So the first thing to point out is that
nobody was there.
Yeah, no one would have been there to hear it. But the other thing to point out too is that even though in Greek they're using the word that translates to what we would use as paradise, that word had a specific implication in it during that time and in that context, where it's basically sort of a throwback to the Garden of Eden, because those two things are interchangeable more or less if you look at Semitic languages from the time. But what that actually meant was the idea of paradise, the idea of some type of place where the dead went to that had some type of happy fulfillment, was actually a reliving or a reemergence of Eden in the land of Jerusalem. And so it was going to be this not heavenly realm, because heaven was God's space. There's actually passages in like Psalms and in the book of either First or Second Kings that make comments about, the heavenly realm, the realm where God is, which is actually above the heavenly realm, is God's place alone. He looks down on humanity and, looks down where humans' place is on earth, and doesn't consider them worthy of his time and attention. But so paradise was supposed to be a spot on earth specifically within Jerusalem. And so when he said, please remember me in paradise, that's where he was talking about.
Yeah.
A paradise on earth.
Yes.
Well, and Jesus was often, when he referred to the kingdom of heaven coming on earth, it wasn't about, but that is so ingrained in us, in Western culture, that heaven is this place that's populated by deceased believers. And yet you're saying, as a scholar, it's not in there.
So pause for just a second. I'm not a biblical scholar, and I have to point that out because it's to be a biblical scholar, you have to have like certain criteria, and I don't meet even half of it, but thank you. But yes, it is.
Well, you're certainly more read on it than most people, I would say. And you have
than the average person, for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. But based on your master's study, that what you're saying is correct, at least to the extent that it can be correct, right?
Yes, because looking at books written by actual scholars, whose works I use in my own book, they mirror a lot of the same points that I'm making in the book, which is that heaven or paradise is not up in the heavens, but is on earth. God's place is up in the heaven. Humans aren't welcome up there. So this is stuff that's all, repeated in other scholarly books, scholarly articles, and acknowledged by people who, do this stuff for their living, teach in universities and stuff. So this is all common knowledge. I just collected it all together and put it in my book to make that point.
Well, I'm familiar with a lot of pastors who, former friends of mine that would say we're people of the book. We if it's in the Bible, that's where we
By God.
And yet, if you were to say to them, like if they were doing a funeral, and of course they're going to say, well, he's in a better place, and he's with all the people that
the saints
predeceased him or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
And if you were to say, well, that's not in the Bible, they would look at you, like you were crazy.
Yeah. And part of that really, it goes a little bit back to what I was saying about my mom not knowing about Judas having committed suicide. And it's because a lot of people build their knowledge around what's in the Bible based on what they learn going to church. And I mean, there are, certainly pastors who go out and get, receive higher education in that field. But the ones who would say, heaven is a real place, it's up in the clouds, and there's a hell with fire and brimstone and people burning and suffering forever. That's just not there. I would argue that, there's mention in the Bible about when people die, they go to the land of their ancestors, but that was viewed as being a place very similar to the Greek idea of Hades. It was a common dwelling place for all the dead. Mm-hmm. But then it got sorted out when, the Jews went into exile in Babylon. They were like, we can't share our afterlife with the same people who are torturing us and taking us out of our holy land. So that's when you start getting like the different levels of good and bad. And, the more Greek influence that came into the culture and into the belief system, that's when things started like separating out. We started having a heavenly idea of paradise, and we have the fire and brimstone of hell and things like that. So there's a number of different variables that came in after the fact that gave rise to those beliefs. But in terms of, if a pastor said that stuff to me and was like, well, that's what's in the Bible, I would be able to go through and say, look, here, no, here, no, here, no. So
yeah. One of the things you mentioned in your book is this notion of a separation, a heavenly realm, or a perfect, I think you said a perfect realm, is a Platonic idea. It comes from Plato.
Yes.
And so Christianity kind of co-opted that notion, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even before Christianity, like Judaism, having a lot of those ideas, and that's thanks to the Hellenization of the East because of Alexander the Great and other well-known figures from that time. I mean, they took a lot of the philosophy from Greece and even from Rome eventually, and started introducing those into the concepts. And part of it was that for them, it just seemed like a better option. Like I said, with the idea of their exile in Babylon, like it just made sense that they needed like some sort of hierarchy of where people would go when they died, because they didn't want to be in the same place as the people who punished them. But the other idea too is that they needed to get more people to join the faith, so they would say, oh, you can still do that thing that you do and believe that same thing, because we believe the same thing too. And so it was sort of a recruiting tool after a while as well.
Kind of like syncretic. Well, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, put it together, a smorgasbord. You see, we've got the same thing, only ours is better. So come join us.
Mean, Christianity started out as cafeteria Catholicism, basically, and that became the mainstream then.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So, you mean cafeteria Judaism?
Oh, cafeteria Judaism, yes.
Okay, right.
It also sounds like they don't want to be buried in that foreign land. They want to be buried with their ancestors. I mean, even if you disregard the afterlife, there is something nice about being buried, your bones being buried next to your loved ones.
Yeah, and that was a huge issue for them while being in exile, but that, again, later became a huge part of the Jewish movement, where it was, you don't necessarily need to go to the temple in Jerusalem to worship, because God was out with you when you were in exile and when you were all in, there's the argument too of, when Moses was leading the people through the deserts, for 40 years, and, God was with them then. So he says at one point, I was with you while you were in tent. So what does it matter if you're in the temple or not? Yeah. So that ended up becoming a part of that that faith structure as well.
That notion of a nomadic God that travels with you and stuff, that's very Jewish. That comes from the but the also the other notion of all our relatives are going to be buried together. That was such a big deal for my dad and my mom.
Well, you buy plots.
Yeah, they have to be together. We all have to be together. And my brother and I are the ones that are outside that thought, that thinking.
I've got a thing where I've been an atheist for about 7 years, and I started deconstructing about 11 years ago, and I was an evangelical minister, FYI, Matthew. So even now, though, and I've done it less and less, but when I go back to Oklahoma, we currently live in Tennessee, but when I go back to Oklahoma, there is a plot. There's a big old block of stone that says Midgley. Mm-hmm. And my great-grandfather, grandfather, and father, and their wives, and two uncles, and their wives, are all buried there, and the only empty plot is my mom's, right next to my dad.
Wow.
And she's still alive.
Right.
But when I go and I stand there, there's 10 plots.
Wow.
Right there. And I'll sit on that big rock, and I'll just kind of talk to them. And
why not?
And I already know they're not listening. I know they're dead, but there's just something about me kind of seeking counsel with the great sages of my family tree,
Sure.
And it's just me talking to me, but somehow it comforts me. I don't know. And like I said, I've done it less and less because I believe in it less and less. Mm-hmm. But there's that. I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah,
sure.
So one of the things that I think is fascinating, and I encourage our listeners and yourself, Matthew, there's a lecture out there by Sheldon Solomon. And
like a YouTube thing?
Yeah, and he's one of those social psychologists that took on Ernest Becker's denial of death stuff. But he's such a funny communicator. It's almost like... Fast Times at Ridgemont High, that surfer dude, yeah,
man.
One of the first roles by, what's his name? Sean Penn.
Yeah.
And
Spicoli.
Spicoli.
Yeah, right.
It's Sheldon Solomon is like a scholarly Spicoli. He even has long hair and a Hawaiian shirt. I kid you not.
Okay, man.
So he's a great presenter, but what he unpacks is this denial of death and the desperate need of humanity to create an immortality for themselves.
Why are we so fucking greedy? What the hell, man?
You look at it as greedy as we...
Like,
you want more?
You want more? That's enough. What's the problem?
Well, but Bob, in all honesty, though, doesn't everybody want more? I mean, I don't personally, but I think that most people do.
Well, we certainly live in a culture that says... You can't say, no thanks, I've had enough. You know what I mean? Yeah, more. It's always got to be more.
And it may not be so much that they want more. It's just that the thought of finality is pretty fucking horrifying.
Yeah.
So
anyway. Sorry, Matthew. We're having a very nice discussion here.
Well, you can jump in.
No, it's fine.
Okay, so let's see. Where were we?
Well, let me go back to this.
Yeah.
Because you have this defibrillator, and because you have died before. Now, I think, just to insert here, I loved a line out of the book that says, what we're saying is we're not asking, is there life after death, as much as we're asking, do I survive the death of my body?
Yes, I think that's what.
And I think that's a better way of framing the question, because we know that our body dies.
Yeah.
But
is there a soul? In other words.
Well, and does the energy that animated my body go on? I think we can say yes. And then secondly, does it go on as me?
Yeah.
And those are questions. I mean, I've heard it said before, Matthew, that. And people even use, I think it's Einstein, to say that energy is eternal.
Yeah.
And so the energy that's animating my corpse right now, that does go on.
Yeah. So it's important to differentiate too that we are carbon-based life forms, and when we die, that carbon goes off to provide life for other life forms, whether it's plant, animal, multicellular little critters, whatever it is. So
Compost.
Yes, there's life force in us that does continue on in the form of our carbon going out and providing that life to other beings. But when we talk about that, what we're not talking about is our consciousness. Mm-hmm. And the consciousness, I think, gets sort of muddied into that idea of what the energy or the life force is that we're really talking about with what I just mentioned. Yeah. So, like Dan Barker, I had seen in a debate, really pointed this out well. It's like saying when we die, that our digestion continues on after us. Well, no, that doesn't happen. Digestion is a function of part of our body, and so is consciousness. Mm-hmm. Consciousness is a function of the brain. Mm-hmm. And so when we, when the curtain goes down on us for the last time, like, consciousness is gone. The brain has stopped working. It is no longer functioning. It's the same thing like when your computer dies, like, you can't open up your same Microsoft Word on a spiritual computer now. It's like it just ceases to function. Yeah. So
carbon is not sentient.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I was getting to, and that was that little detour, was that this familiarity and this kind of self-awareness or death awareness that is at the fore of someone's mind, because I think all religions and all these narratives, they serve to distract us from this fact that we are sentient. We know as humans we're different from animals in that we know that we're going to die, and we know that we could die at any time in a way and in a moment beyond our control. But somebody like Matthew, who's walking around with a defibrillator thing, in his heart, he's died before, he doesn't have the luxury of deluding himself as much as the rest of us.
Is that true, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that preoccupies my every moment.
Sure.
And for a while, it was like a frightening and anxiety-driving thing in my life, where I was like, oh my God, I can really like die at any point, and I couldn't function like that. And so what it turned into for me is, instead of focusing that I can die at any point, or that, death is inevitable and I'm not going to continue on, it became more of a, what's going on for me right now that's good? Like, what am I like not taking advantage of or not acknowledging that's a really good thing in my life? Because I was so focused on the death and when it might come and if it's going to come, that I wasn't focused on, these are all the good things happening in my life right now. Like, oh my God, or I guess that's a bad thing to say, but oh wow, I'm a conscious being. I'm on a planet that has life, the only one that we know of right now. And I feel feelings. I can walk upright. I can breathe. I don't need like a ventilator or anything. I have people who love me. I experience all these good things. And so I just had to refocus that energy into, these moments that I have are the only ones I'm going to have.
Yeah.
And so I need to make sure that I'm taking full advantage of everything that I can right now and making sure that I'm happy with what I'm doing, because once the lights go out, I don't get a second chance. That's it.
Live in the now.
Yeah.
To be or not to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and gratitude, everybody knows. I mean, even secular people have discovered the value of gratitude. We don't have an object that we thank, but we are grateful to be breathing in and out, to see that sunset, to hear that music, to experience that orgasm. I mean, like life is amazing.
Yeah.
And I think Bart Campolo said it, and many people have said it, that in a market environment of like supply demand, scarcity drives up the value. And so the fact that life is finite and is bookended by unconsciousness drives up the value. And an afterlife diminishes the value of this. In fact,
that's a good point.
I'm not sure. I think even when I was a Christian, I often wondered, if this life is so bad, not only does the Bible say that, this world has been turned over to Satan and it's deprived, and the reason he flooded the earth was it was just a stench in his nostrils as far as depravity goes. And then the fact that the afterlife is like we won't have a sin nature. We will be like him. In the twinkling of an eye, we will be made like Jesus, who is the perfect person and sinless being. And that we will love and feel love and everything will be perfect. That's obviously an energy that's sucking you out of this moment. Like, you want to be there.
Yeah.
Instead of making you more present. And heaven is pretty goddamn powerful magnet to suck you out of that moment. I mean, so it's not only wrong and not true, it's bad for you.
Yeah.
Wow. So when did the book start then? So you're 14, 15, you're thinking about it, you're reading.
It's part of his thesis.
Right, it's part of the thesis and all that. And so did you take just parts of your thesis and put it together, or did you just do a lot of research? How did you get this thing going?
Well, I knew after I did my thesis, so the end to that story was that, I'd come to that same conclusion that I came to in the book, turned it into my professor, and he didn't like the conclusion, so I got a B+ on it.
What?
Yeah, he was pissed at my conclusion, so I got a B+.
Well, he's a believer, right?
Yeah, Catholic priest. So I was like, well, you know what? I bet I can do more research. I can expand on all this stuff, and I can make it definitive that this is bullshit. What my professor told me that he believed to be the truth is bullshit. And I had just finished writing my second book, and I was approached by my publisher asking if I had any other ideas for other books. And I said, well, I have one that's going to be an expansion off my graduate thesis on the afterlife. And he was like, great, I'll send out the contract. Wow. So it was like, oh, okay. So I immediately went to work. I already had a ton of notes set up to sort of start over from scratch. But I also started researching more on the scientific aspects of the afterlife, on the philosophical issues of the afterlife. And over the next probably 6 or 7 months, I had put together the book that is now Afterlife.
Yeah.
So that's where it came from.
And just as an aside, if those who enjoy having libraries and, books in their house and books on their reader and what have you, this is one that's got to be there. You've got to have this book because it condenses so many good ideas and not good ideas, sentient, important ideas. So that's my little plug for your book.
Well, thank you.
But I mean, it's really that good.
And spoiler alert, there is no afterlife. So for those that read the book,
that's right.
I'm telling you, we're going to just go ahead and tell you his conclusion that there ain't one.
I mean, that's like going to the movie Titanic and shouting out the boat's going to sink.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone knows it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I think this is this is a question that, and I appreciate you saying that I used to be more agnostic on certain things, and I'm becoming more and more certain on certain things. And obviously, not everybody is comfortable with the fact that the name of this show is Everyone's Agnostic. I mean, literally, I've had more atheists push back against that name than anybody. But it's my desire to invite people to the table and at least come to the table with some humility and some willingness to listen and learn in case you're wrong or whatever. But Bob and I are both full-blown atheists, and we totally 100% believe there is no afterlife.
Yeah,
but,
pretty much.
99.99.
Well, and what do you say to people like, well, geez, Matthew, I mean, how could you do this? I mean, it's not uplifting. I mean, how could you write a book that's so sad and depressing? And it's really not, but what do you say to them?
That was really sort of the opinion that I had. Like, I had finished writing the book, and I was like, man, everyone's going to hate this. But it was sort of a pointing out, like, okay, there's some really bad news, but with that comes the good news. So the bad news is, once we die, that's it. There's really nothing else. But the good news is, we still contribute to life after the fact, and we still contribute, even not necessarily on the dispersing our carbon back out into the atmosphere, but we leave legacies behind. We have families and friends that we influence and help them make significant choices in their lives. And they, in turn, take that step to do good things out in the world because of us, too. And we make, we do all these little things that end up significantly improving our environments and affecting the people around us positively. But on top of that, too, it's like I said before, we need to be in the moment, and we need to, not be drawn towards that magnet of heaven or hell. We need to be focused in the present moment. We need to take advantage of the things that are around us. So, it sucks to think that when the day comes and we die, there's nothing after it. But what are you doing right now to make sure that you're enjoying everything that's going on around you? Because if you're too focused on the end goal of what happens after I die, you're not focused on what's going on around you and not appreciating those little things that you're not ever going to get to experience again.
Right. And, and then there's Ecclesiastes, too, that says, don't worry. you'll be gone, and in a couple hundred years, everybody will be gone too, and nobody will remember you. So fine, what's the problem?
That's your paraphrase of Ecclesiastes.
Pretty much. I mean, you're just. It's like you said, Matthew. It's the moment.
Yeah.
Be in the moment. This is your moment. So be in your moment.
There you go.
Exactly. Yeah. Makes sense.
Speaking of legacies, are you married?
That's a hard one, huh?
Yes and no.
Oh, okay. Between, eh?
Yes, I'm currently between, yes.
Okay.
But I do have children, if that's what you were getting to.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Awkward.
Okay.
No, it's okay. I'm completely open with it, so
Yeah.
no
Okay.
worries.
No, is it because, did you break up because of your beliefs? I mean, was it a religious thing, or?
No, I mean,
Okay.
when we got together, she knew that I was an atheist, and I knew she was fairly liberal Roman Catholic, but she actually, because of that book, sort of let go of those beliefs too. So it was
So it's other things. Other things.
Yeah,
It usually is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we don't get another.
So what do you do for fun? What are some of your hobbies, Matthew?
So some of my hobbies, aside from reading and writing, I also play music pretty frequently. That was my undergraduate studies, was in music. So multi-instrumentalist, singer, performer type things.
Do you have any music like on the like on iTunes or something? Can we play some of your tunes?
You could absolutely. There's a band that I used to play in that's on iTunes called Waiting for a Miracle. Not a Christian band, I should point out, but I used to sing for that band. We, had a recording contract and had put out one album, and so there's that. But I do have songs that I have written that are up on SoundCloud. So if you go to soundcloud.com/Matt O'Neill Music, you should be able to find me.
We're going to do that.
Do you have any instrumental music that we could use for like the segue of this show?
I absolutely have a ton of instrumental music.
Yeah, well, just maybe send me a link or something, or an MP3, and we often use different bumper music and segue music for each episode, and it's always cool to feature the music of the guest,
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, be a ton of fun, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So you said you're currently, as a hobby and as a habit, reading and writing. Are you working on another book or anything, or?
Yeah, I'm actually in the middle of a new book, and it is somewhat to do with scripture and religion and all that. But the other end of it too, my actual full-time career is I do social work. I work in the prison system.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And one of the big things that I've really learned is that by using blanket terms for a lot of people, whether it's, Christians, Southerners, Republicans, Democrats, what have you, there are blanket labels that we put on people, and we associate people with meeting certain, ideologies or acting a certain way. We kind of ignore the individual experiences by people. And so what I'm working on is a book talking about, especially with the current political climate and how everyone's sort of like at each other's throats about everything. I mean, even just looking at the whole Nazi punch thing that happened.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's a book that's basically exploring, like, even though there were people who voted for Donald Trump, they did it in spite of certain things, very much like a lot of people who voted for Hillary Clinton did it in spite of certain things. And so it's basically a book stating, like, here's what goes on in these different areas people might not be conscious of. But it's looking at it from both sides. It's understanding, like, the concept of white privilege, the concept of male privilege, and what people in various ethnic, religious, and political climates go through that may have influenced the way that they voted or the way that they're addressing certain political issues. So
what's good, though, about authors is the way they say things, the way they think and the way they say things.
Yeah.
And some people, like you mentioned, Bart Ehrman, you can read Bart Ehrman and suddenly understand the Bible because he explains it so clearly. And that's what I like about your book, too, Matthew. I mean, it's so clear and obvious and connected. And that's what really great teachers do that. They connect the dots, man. That's what they do.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So you got it. Let me get this straight. So you had a first book, right? And this book, Afterlife, is actually your second book. Is that right?
Afterlife is actually my third book.
Your third book? Wow.
Yep.
So what are the other ones?
So the first one is basically deconstructing the idea that Jesus is the Messiah, and argues that if we push aside for a moment the argument of whether Jesus really existed or not, and we look at what Scripture says about it, we can definitively say that no, Jesus was not the Messiah that Judaism or Christianity later expected. So that book is called You Say That I Am. My second book is called What the Bible Really Does and Doesn't Say About Sex.
Ooh,
and
yes.
that one talks about our culture, specifically the culture in the United States, has really politicized a lot of sexual issues and demonized and antagonized people who do certain things. And I talk about like how Rush Limbaugh said, if we're going to cover birth control in medical plans, then women should have to start uploading videos of themselves having sex. So he's a horrible human being.
Yes, he's kind of an idiot.
But so I talk about, where these ideas come from, how they became antagonized over the millennia since the time of Jesus, or when the books of the Bible were written, and how these stories that people are pulling from Scripture actually had nothing to do with how they're being applied today and what they meant in their historical context, and how it got warped and shifted over time, and how culture really changed a lot of that. So
excellent.
Yeah,
so the third one then is this one, The Afterlife.
Yes.
And then the fourth one you're working on, you just said.
Well, I want to go back to that one, because when you were describing it, I mean, are you going to give me tools for engaging people in their real person, as opposed to, I think it was David Dark's book that he said, the moment I label someone is the moment I don't have to engage them. And actually, there are people that say labels are a form of violence.
Yeah, and there's something I've kind of noticed, and I'm giving away sort of a chunk of what the book's going to be about, but, there's this big movement, or this big idea within more left of center circles that say, like, yes, there's certain titles that are appropriate and that I will use for myself, but if you use these titles, like, that offends me. And, it is to some people a form of violence, because it triggers them. It brings up bad memories. It brings up abuse that's happened. And so by calling a person who is transgender, please forgive me for using this, but using the word like tranny for someone in that category, or by making some type of remark about, like, oh, you identify as a woman, but you still have a dick, so you're still a guy. Yeah. Like using any type of language like that. I mean, it is really shameful and hurtful to the person, because it's not a part of their identity. And so, there's this argument now too about, using the word Nazi and racist, and how there are these other titles for people who are doing things that we don't like, where we use them against them, and culturally we know that those titles are
weaponized,
negative.
Yeah.
That, it's going to trigger those people to not want to engage with you, because the second you label someone racist, then it's about defending themselves as not being racist, and that's the only thing they're going to focus on.
Right.
So,
and the thing is, too, you're talking about nuance.
Yeah.
You're talking about thinking in nuance, and we live in a country, I hope it's changing, where there's not a lot of nuance, at least not in our political speech. That's for sure. You know, like Mr. Trump can very easily say, that loser judge. What does that loser judge know? Stupid. It's part of our democratic institutions, man. You don't say that. Don't do that. Yeah. So this nuance thing, you're taking on a pretty big challenge there, I think.
Yeah, I am. It's probably going to be my biggest book to date. So
yeah, but I'd get it, though.
Cool.
Well, and what comes to mind for me is whenever we kind of subtly refer to identity politics, and that I do bring my color, I do bring my gender, I do bring my orientation into every room that I walk or whatever. It would be maybe disrespectful to my story or my heritage to just disregard that. I think the veil of ignorance, that I know that that's an ideal to say that if I'm going to make legislation for this diverse populace, then I need to, like, the way Stephen Colbert says, I'm colorblind. And, this is the nuance, though, because for some people, when they hear Martin Luther King say, don't judge a man by the color of his skin, but by his integrity and character and stuff, well, that's an invitation to be colorblind. Like, white people take that and run and say, well, I don't care, and what is it then when you get colleges that have a quota for so many minorities? What's that called?
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action. Somebody would say that's reverse racism because you're actually treating somebody different based on the color of their skin or whatever. This is so fucking complicated.
Yeah, it really is.
It is.
It is.
It is.
But I go back to what my mom said.
What's that?
And she pounded it into my head. Think of others. Think of others.
3 words.
That's it. Think about it's not about you, man. Think of others.
Yeah.
It's not all about you. So, and that's pretty easy, but not simple, as they say. Simple, but not easy. Hard to
Well, that's fascinating work, Matthew. I'm looking for. Well, maybe let's have you back on when that puts out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would love to.
So, do you have a like a website as well? Do you have like a blog or something? People can check you out.
Well, I write for the Danthropology blog on Patheos.
I know that one.
Yeah,
we've had Patheos, of course.
We've had Dan on the show.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yep. So I write for Dan's blog. I have a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/YouSayThatIam.
Okay. That's that first book.
Yes, from the first book, because like every iteration of my name has been taken on Facebook, so I can't get one with my name. So
yeah, exactly.
Well, on that note, let me ask you this: on the "You Say That I Am," do you believe Jesus existed as a historical figure?
So I am relatively agnostic on that position.
Yeah.
I have gone both ways, where I've been very adamant that Jesus existed, but then very adamant that Jesus didn't exist. And so I guess the easiest way to put it is that I lean more towards Jesus existed, but the historical method is a very flawed method in terms of proving things like that. We don't have definitive science to be able to establish that a single individual has or has not existed, especially under the conditions of, first century Palestine, peasant living.
Right.
But
not a lot of good record keeping going on.
No, not with them anyway. Not with
no, especially when the population's illiterate.
Yeah, exactly.
So I lean more towards he might have existed, but there's no definitive way to be able to establish that he had.
Yeah, right. And it's kind of irrelevant almost.
A lot of people say that. What does it matter? Like Moses.
Yeah. There's decent arguments on both sides. There's one where there's somebody that recorded in that time and had somebody like Jesus existed, especially if they were doing miracles.
Yeah,
he would have been in that.
Other than Josephus, you mean? Yeah,
there was something like just the omission of Jesus from that narrative is there's no, so stuff like that.
I get you. Hey, I have a kind of I don't know, see how you feel about this one, Matthew. Now, given your medical condition, are you okay? I mean, is your life going to be shortened at all because of this problem, or are you going to be able to live a long, happy life?
It depends who you ask. My doctors all tell me that, I'm not expected to have any shortened life scenario. I should be able to live a full normal life. There are various studies that say there might be a couple years scraped off what the national average is, but otherwise, no, I should live to pretty decent old age. So
I hope so. Yeah, we need more books, more Matthew books. Yeah. Yay. And what about your kids?
I have 4 children. They are 10, 8, 3, and 2. And the youngest 2 actually have my heart condition as well.
Oh gosh. Wow. But that's got to hurt.
It sucks. But, the technology's advanced enough that they know how to treat it and they know all the warning signs, and there's a plan in place to make sure that they're taken care of and nothing's going to happen to them, nothing as bad as what happened to me. So,
right.
Well, praise science.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
Glory to science.
All glory.
All glory goes to you, oh science.
Yeah, I hear you. Are you, by the way, do you go to movies or anything? Are you a moviegoer or TV person, or what do you do for fun?
I'm a big movie person, absolutely.
Yeah. What have you seen lately? Anything?
Oh, wow. I think the last movie I saw in the theater actually was the second Ninja Turtles movie with my kids.
Here I'm going with La La Land.
We had another guest say that one.
Ninja Turtles. Well, the kids love that stuff, though, so I get it.
But as far as Netflix or something, I mean,
Oh, yeah. Netflix, absolutely.
Yeah. There's a lot of good stuff on Netflix now.
I just started watching, it's a show called 11/22/63. It's got James Franco in it.
Oh, my.
Oh, this is about Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched that. That was good. It's a Stephen King book. Used to be a book. Now it's a...
I didn't know that.
Very interesting. Very strange. It's a very strange, kind of... You're able to go through time. You go through a little, wormhole or something into a different time. And of course, Kennedy, or the guy, James Franco knows that Kennedy's going to die. But but what's he going to do to stop it? Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much the story. So... Strange, very strange.
All right, wow. Matthew. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and we're gonna, links to the book are in the show notes. We've mentioned it several times. We wish you the best of luck.
Don't forget your music too. We want to put the music on.
Yeah,
too.
we'll
link you all up, so it's not a problem.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I can't wait to hear it.
Matthew O'Neill. Wow.
Afterlife, Solving Science, and Religion's Great Disagreement.
I'm telling you, once you find an author that you really like and get into and say, well, this guy really makes it clear, buy as many of his other books as you can. That's what I did with George. There's a historian by the name of George Marsden.
Uh-huh. And you latched on to him.
I love him. He is just the best.
So whatever he puts out, you're probably
I want it. I want to read it.
Especially if the topic is relevant
exactly,
to you.
Because he's a historian. And, of course, Bart Ehrman. And, there are a few of them. Elaine Pagels was great. You could very easily understand what she writes. And so, that's the kind of stuff I mean. It's almost like taking a college class. If you like the professor, find other classes that he or she teaches and enjoy, because you learn a lot.
And I think that's true of anything. Like if you like Jimmy Fallon, you don't necessarily care who his guests are. You like, so it's like if you latch onto an author you like, you don't necessarily care what the topic is, unless it just doesn't interest you whatsoever. But going in, you have this familiarity with this author, and so it's going to be a good experience.
Yeah, you like the way they turn phrases, you like the way they say, "Oh, that makes sense. That's clear." That's absolutely.
Well, and Matthew can be that, and he's obviously prolific because he's pumping out books, and I found his the chapters that I was able to read before, I found it very accessible.
Yeah, me too. And you let me read a couple of chapters. So
there's tons of footnotes though. So I mean, it's scholarly in the sense that he's not just pulling it out of his ass. Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's supported with
like 23 minutes in heaven or whatever the hell that was. Was it 23 minutes?
I don't give that shit a time.
But isn't it? But this happened so recently. Some kid says he died, went to heaven, and then he said, "No, that's a lie," or "I didn't." But his dad wrote the book already, and he's still collecting royalties on it.
I don't care. I don't care about those people. I mean, obviously they're bestsellers and they're screwing up. They're lying to people, but.
Yeah, I get you. Well, I enjoyed this one. This was a good one.
Yeah.
Let's do some more.
All right, man.
All right, I'll talk to you next time.
Dead, we fell in love to make crimes. Squeezed my arm, leaving purple marks. The dead just
Where's the best place to meet your online friends? Where's the best party where the fun never ends? Where will Bobby Carey be our MC too? I bet you'd go if you only knew. It's ReasonCon, it's ReasonCon in Hickory, North Carolina. It's ReasonCon, it's ReasonCon, and the speakers couldn't be finer. We've got Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra, Callie Wright and Lawrence Krauss. We've got god-awful movies coming to you live, and Jim Craig and Shelley Siegel really jive. It's ReasonCon, it's ReasonCon. Meet the people in your favorite podcasts. It's ReasonCon, it's ReasonCon, the conference where you'll have a blast.